Welcome to episode 4 of our Western Queensland trip. This video is a collection of photographs I have taken so that family and friends can see where Rick and I have been. In this episode we visit the Dig Tree and then make our way to Innaminka, where we spend a couple of days resting and exploring. For such an isolated and remote area of South Australia, there was a lot of European colonial history to immerse ourselves in. Our first stop was the Dig Tree. We unhooked and left the van at the Napameri turn-off, as the road condition was to proceed with caution. The gravel road was rough in a couple of places and the creek crossings were washed out, but on the whole, the gravel road would have been caravan accessible. In other words, it wasn't bad. It was quite a hot day when we arrived at the Dig Tree on Bulla Bulla Waterhole, known for the famous explorers Robert O'Hara Burke and William John Wills, and their ill-fated attempt to traverse Australia from south to north, and is a stark reminder of the harsh plight faced by Australia's early inland pioneers. Their journey, originally named the Victorian Exploring Expedition, was posthumously renamed the Burke and Wills Expedition. The Dig Tree site marks the establishment of Camp 65, a depot for the party as they travelled northwards. It is at this location that the party split up, with Burke, Wills, Gray and King travelling north, while Bray and his party remained at camp with instructions to wait 3 months before returning south. Located on the northern bank of the Coopers Creek, the Dig Tree is a coolabah believed to be approximately 250 years old. When the Burke and Wills expedition pitched tent here in December 1860, the tree was already over 100 years old. 3 coolabah trees became living message boards over the years. The Dig Tree itself had 3 blazes, one carved in 1860-61 to record the expedition's arrival and departure dates and is no longer visible. The second, the Burke and Wills Camp 65 blaze, that is partially visible on the south-facing side of the tree, and the third, carved in 1862 by Alfred Howitt's search party who buried supplies there. It too is no longer visible. Bray's tree also had one blaze carved in 1861 with the word dig, but it too is no longer visible. The face tree, still visible, has a carved portrait of Burke by John Dick carved in 1898, with a likeness of Burke, and a second blaze no longer visible that had his initials and those of his wife, along with the date of the carving. Reproductions of the original carvings were provided so that we could see what the blazes looked like. As there are 2 trees carved with the word dig, there is some confusion over which one is the real Dig Tree. The tree we were looking at was not the original tree that the message was carved on, but was on the nearby tree called Bray's tree. In 1862, Alexander Howitt's search party carved dig on the tree we were looking at as a message to the other members of his party. Both the dig blazes grew over, and it was not until recently that scholars identified the real Dig Tree as Bray's tree. Burke, Wills, King and Gray became the first Europeans to cross Australia south to north when they reached the Bynoe River, surrounded by thick mangrove swamps 20 kilometres short of the Gulf of Carpentaria in February 1861. After 3 days of trying to navigate the swamps, they commenced the return journey. Eventually, lack of provisions, along with rain, mud, humidity, sun, heat and dust storms took their toll on the party. And in mid-April 1861, 4 days before reaching Camp 65, Bray died from malnutrition. Burke, Wills and King returned to Camp 65, only to find that Bray's party, who had waited just over 4 months, had departed just 9 hours earlier. Before the base camp party deserted the depot, they had buried some provisions in a camel trunk on the remote chance that Burke and Wills returned, with instructions to dig carved into a tree to indicate hidden stores. After resting at the Dig Tree, Burke, Wills and King, with their camels, headed southwest in an attempt to cross the Strzelecki Desert and reach a station at Mount Hopeless. When their camels died, they decided to head back to Cooper's Creek. Exhausted and starving, Burke and Wills soon perished. Only King survived, aided by the local Aboriginal people, and he was found alive in September 1861. We passed Nappamerri Homestead with double frontage to the Cooper Creek and bounded to the west by the South Australian border, and was built above and adjacent to Nappamerri Waterhole. The property has not a lot of channels through the area, but is part of a natural floodplain and contains low-lying swamps that provide excellent feed after floodouts, with water that lasts until the dry season. The station currently occupies an area of 7,275 square kilometres and is able to carry 15,000 head of cattle. Rick had flown into Nappamerri many years ago, so had seen the countryside from the air, though seeing it on the ground gave him a different perspective, though it was a lot like country where we had previously lived and travelled through when we were younger. In 1871, a 19-year-old Victorian, John Conrick, visited Cooper Creek, inspired by stories of Burke and Wills, and invested money in a herd of cattle, and took up the property which included the Digtree site, which he called Nappamerri, and acted as custodian of the Digtree until the Conrick family sold the property in 1954. After spending the morning at the Digtree, we returned to the turnoff, hitched the van, and returned to the blacktop of the Bench Away. The countryside between Nappamerri Turnoff and the Innaminka Reserve is varied and can only be described as incredibly unique. From wide open, windswept, treeless plains, gibber plains and dry lakes, flood-out country, red sand dunes and plateaus, it was incredible country. We crossed washed-out causeways and long stretches of road. The tree-lined watercourses stood out across the landscape. On occasion, we appeared to be travelling along the top of a plateau. Then we would be travelling along sections of roads that had a slight descent. However, the curve of the horizon was always visible. I was fascinated by the height of the red dunes in various shades of red that ran parallel to the road in places, often dotted with cattle and contrasted with the yellow and white soils. I was amazed by the amount of dry feed, especially as we were coming out of winter. The closer to Innaminka we got, mountain ranges in the distance began to appear before us and off to the west. Out of nowhere would appear a pile of boulders. Then there were the rocky outcrops off the end of plateaus. To think we were entering the desert country, with Innaminka surrounded by the Strzelecki Desert to the south and the Stony Desert to the north. I always thought that the desert country was dry, barren land, but the country we were travelling through was certainly not like that. It took us a while before we came to the South Australian border and the Innaminka Regional Reserve that started as we crossed the border and is a park of contrasts. The reserve covers an area of 13,800 square kilometres, or more than 1.3 million hectares of land, and has a complex and diverse range of landscapes, ranging from the life-giving wetlands of the Cooper Creek system, red and white dunes, gibber plains of the stark arid outback, floodplains and salt lakes, as well as sustaining a large commercial beef cattle enterprise, along with oil and gas fields. The Innaminka Regional Reserve was the first reserve of its type in Australia to allow balanced usage for recreation, cattle and energy production. We were now in South Australia, and names such as Charles Sturt, Sydney Kidman, Bordello Downs, the Australian Inland Mission and the Reverend John Flynn are intrinsically woven into the stories of Innaminka and the Cooper Creek. Originally named Hopeton, Innaminka came to town on the 17th of April 1890. With early European explorers and later the establishment of the pastoral industry, transport routes and the need for services saw Innaminka develop. The first settlers in the area were customs officers who, before Federation in 1901, collected taxes from the drovers crossing the Queensland border who travelled down the Strzelecki track. The drovers naturally developed a thirst for something stronger than water while their stock was counted, and in 1871 a hotel was opened beside Cooper Creek, named by Captain Charles Sturt on the 13th of October 1845 when he crossed the watercourse at a point approximately 24 kilometres west of the current township. Due to the low level of the water, he used the term creek rather than river to describe the watercourse that often becomes inundated with floodwaters. In 1879, coaches started a fortnightly mail run from Volcano to Innamincka station. Transport and communications to the area greatly improved during the 1880s when Afghan cameleers took over the mail run and government wells were struck along the Strzelecki track. The original inn became the nucleus of the small settlement that soon included a lean-to police house, storehouse, cellar and meat house, a blacksmith and a cemetery. The droving of stock and the passage of camel trains carrying wool bales or supplies between the northern station and the southern railhead led to a steady stream of customers at both the hotel and police station during the 1880s. The permanent police station, delayed in its construction by drought, was washed away by floods in 1885 before it was completed. In 1929, Reverend John Flynn's Australian Inland Mission opened the Elizabeth Simon Nursing Home to provide medical and social services to the isolated population. This made Innaminka an important centre in the region until the shifting sand during the 1930s drought closed the Strzelecki track and an alternative route was developed from Birdsville to the Marie rail line, which became known as the Birdsville track. Pedal radio installed at the nursing home in the early 1930s lessened Innaminka's isolation and provided its first instant link with the outside world. During its 22-year existence, the nursing home became the venue for meetings, dances, a local library, a post office, church services and Sunday school. It closed in 1951 following the success of the new Flying Doctor service. Shortly afterwards, the police station, hotel and store also closed, and the town's demise was complete. After setting up Gidget, the caravan, we ventured about 20 kilometres south of Innaminka to Birrelly Waterhole, the site of Wills's monument. A marker identifies the place where he is believed to have died, close to where he is buried. On failing to reach Mount Hopeless, the furthest extent of settlement in South Australia, the party attempted to return to Cooper Creek, but Wills became exhausted and was unable to continue. He urged Burke and King to continue on, leaving him alone with food, water and shelter, but sadly he died. The exact date of his death is unknown, but it has generally been accepted to be June 28, 1861. A cairn was built in 1973 and a monument marks the site of the grave. Wills was originally third in command and was the scientific member and party surveyor, meteorologist and astronomical observer. The second in command, George Landels, resigned after a number of arguments with Burke that saw Wills replace him as second in command. John King was the assistant and cameleer. Charles Gray, the horse and supplies handler, as well as the cook. From Wills's monument, we made our way back towards Innaminka. About 5 kilometres from Innaminka, we stopped at King's Site Campground, the site where the sole survivor of the Burke and Wills expedition, John King, was found alive in 1861. King's marker is the site where John King was rescued in September 1861 in the nearby creek. King had survived for 10 weeks after the death of Burke and Wills, because of the generosity of local Aboriginal people. A blaze was cut sometime around 1947 in a tree to mark the historic site, but in 1987 a windstorm destroyed the tree. The remains of the trunk were mounted and reinstalled in 1989. After visiting the sites, we returned to Innaminka. It truly is a hidden gem. Though small, Innaminka lies amidst the striking desert landscape. It is so far from anywhere, yet captivating with a unique blend of natural beauty, rich in history and culturally significant. This small town, hidden away near Cooper Creek, was an unforgettable experience. The isolation, challenges and hardship, as well as the determination to battle this harsh outback environment, was remarkable. Distance, isolation, heat, and not to mention the flies, are of little consequence when we have travelled here in the luxury of an air-conditioned car and caravan with all the comforts of home. Since explorer Charles Sturt first visited Cooper Creek in 1845, followed by Augustus Gregory in 1858, searching for fellow explorer Ludwig Leichhardt, and then white settlement in the area, Innaminka has had a tenuous history with many difficult times as well as good. Since 1882, when the first police outpost was set up, followed by a general store 2 years later and then the pub, the town in its early years continued to flourish. Until Federation in 1901, Innaminka prospered as a customs depot. In 1929, an inland mission hospital, nursing home and flying doctor base was established, but eventually all facilities closed and the town was abandoned in 1952. In such an isolated area of Australia, I can see why. It remained an abandoned town until the 1960s, when gas and oil were discovered in the area, and a sharp increase in four-wheel drive adventurers trying their luck on the Strzelecki track prompted the revival of the town. In the early 1970s, a trading post and a new hotel, along with accommodation, provided a welcome respite for visitors to the area. Thankfully, I am glad that the town has re-established itself. The next morning, we ventured out to Burke's Monument, located 11 kilometres northeast of Innaminka. The monument commemorates the site where Robert O'Hara Burke's body was found in 1861 by a rescue party led by Alfred Howitt. John McKinlay, who found his body, blazed a tree at the site. The site was also the temporary grave for the body until 1862, until his remains were taken to Melbourne for reburial. The Victorian Exploring Expedition was posthumously renamed the Burke and Wills Expedition, involved 19 men, 26 camels, 23 horses and several supply wagons, with Robert O'Hara Burke being the leader of the expedition, and according to research was believed to be a gentleman of good breeding, with a confident military manner and an impressive beard that must make for an effective leader. But Burke was not a bushman, as he had absolutely no tracking or surveying experience and was extremely hot-tempered. His appointment as leader was highly controversial and attracted much criticism about his experience and suitability for the position. The nearby Congy Lakes surrounded the Innamincka Reserve. Prior to Burke and Wills' expedition across Australia, they also stumbled across the lakes in late 1860. In the mid-1870s, the area was named the Land of Promise Station and stocked with cattle, sheep, horses and bullock teams. And in little more than a decade, pastoral runs were established. In 1902, Sydney Kidman took over the lease on the station, adding it to a string of adjoining properties that became part of the Cattle King's huge pastoral empire, providing reliable water for cattle being moved across country to market. Congy Lakes is rarely dry and provides an important refuge for migrating waterbirds that travel from Russia and China. On our return to camp, we spent the afternoon checking Gidget, caravan, and the boat, car, for our next leg along the Arrowby Road to Haddon Corner. Thank you for watching. Take care and stay safe. Cheers for now, Rick and Rosemary.